This week on the agenda, we examine China's agenda for the next 5 years and see what the latest roadmap means for China and the rest of the world. Every 5 years, China unveils a national roadmap, setting priorities for growth, innovation and reform. The first 5-year plan was announced in 1953, focusing on heavy industry. Steel, coal and power plants laid the foundations for a modern economy, with industrial output rising from 34.3 billion yuan to 78.3 billion. By the time of the 7th plan in 1986, the focus shifted from production to innovation. The 863 programme drove breakthroughs in biotechnology, aerospace and computing. During the Asian financial crisis, China's plans focused on cutting interest rates, boosting spending and introducing Golden Week holidays, which helped spur domestic demand. The 10th plan in 2001 marked China's global breakthrough, joining the World Trade Organization and encouraging firms like Lenovo and TCL to expand overseas. The 13th 5-year plan marked a major turning point, driving innovation, green growth and balanced prosperity. President Xi set the ambitious goal of doubling China's 2010 GDP by 2020 and succeeded. The 14th 5-year plan, ending this year, put the focus on high-quality growth powered by innovation, green energy and technological self-reliance. It reflected China's ambition to evolve from the world's factory into a global innovation hub. So let's look ahead now to the contents of the 15th 5-year plan, taking us from 2026 to 2030. Here with me are Dr. Palitha Kohona, Sri Lanka's former ambassador to China and now CEO of AsiaAdvisors, and Janusz Wojciechowski, former European Commissioner for Agriculture and Food. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the agenda. Dr. Kohona, let me start with you. How critical is the next 5-year plan to China's economic goal of socialist modernization by 2035?
My own view is that these 5-year plans, and this is not the first one, have been very important to China. China has progressed from being a poor third world country to now being the second richest country in the world. And in fact, in certain aspects, it is probably ahead of many of the other countries of the world. One thing about these 5-year plans is that they are meticulously formulated. There's endless discussions that go on in the preparation of these 5-year plans. And then another important factor about them is they have all been people-centered. These 5-year plans have been people-centered. So the extensive consultations that take place before a 5-year plan is formulated contributes considerably to their success.
Yeah.
After the 5-year plan is formulated, adopted, then its implementation is also meticulously monitored. We've seen this through actual practice. That's another very important aspect. The goal of all these 5-year plans, unlike in many other countries where plans are formulated for the benefit of the few, in China, it is for the benefit of the people as a whole. In China, all these 5-year plans, and they have been substantially successful, have been formulated with the view to enhancing the lives of the people. We constantly hear about socialism with Chinese characteristics. I think the Chinese characteristic about the 5-year plans is the fact that they are all people-centered, and the Chinese people are at the center of these plans.
Janusz, let me bring you here. Looking back at the previous 5 years and looking ahead to the next 5-year plan, what do you see as the vision for China?
No, this is a very interesting plan. And from one hand, this is the continuation of the 14th plan, very ambitious increase of the Chinese economy, increase of the Chinese GDP, modernization of economy, technology, innovation, and this is the continuation. We know that the Chinese progress in the past, and this is the continuation. And what is visible in the new concept of the plan is what Mr. Kohona mentioned. The Chinese people are in the center of the plan, more attention for the social aspect, for the quality of life, and what is very important for me as a European citizen, European politician, is more attention for the environmental climate aspects. That's many similarities we can observe in the ambitious Chinese plan to the European Union Farm to Fork or biodiversity strategy. That this is very promising, and we welcome this direction of the Chinese strategy for the future, because we should cooperate to better protect our environment. Very positive aspects of the plan. Also, I'd like to mention that the positive aspects for me as a European, that's Chinese openness for the bilateral cooperation, mutual cooperation, diversification of trade, diversification of the food import. You know, China is the biggest food producers in the world, but also the biggest food importer in the world. European Union is the biggest food exporter. This is interesting area for cooperation. Generally, but especially in the area of food production, area of agriculture. Good background for the development of this cooperation between China and European Union. This is very important for me.
Palitha, China really wants to stoke investment, particularly when it comes to tech innovation, and they want to speed up that agriculture and rural modernisation that Janusz was talking about. But what about cranking up that still sluggish domestic market?
Unlike Europeans, and more so the Americans, the Chinese traditionally have been savers. When they have surplus funds, they save the money. They don't spend it, which is not the same in Europe or in America. People tend to go and spend what they have. The Chinese have a record level of savings. And this is the thing that we have to take into account when the government of China is trying so hard to encourage consumption. The Chinese will consume, and now I've lived there for the last 3 years, and I've seen their consumption levels going up. I've seen them spending money in restaurants and in shops and online shopping, etc. But it's still way below the other developed countries, in my view. And this is where the Chinese will continue to have a challenge. Chinese government, despite all the effort it's making, it has promoted consumption-related expos in China. Now, for example, next week, the China International Import Expo in Shanghai will begin to last for a week. Millions of people will walk through this expo and buy things and get used to foreign products. This essentially highlight foreign products. And the Chinese government has been trying to encourage its people to consume foreign products, but still I think there is a gap, and there's very little that the government can do to encourage people to spend money other than to provide them with incentives. Now they live in better accommodation than, say, 30 years ago. They eat much, much better than 30 years ago, and they dress much better than 30 years ago. All this change has taken place, but we need to go a bit further. And the 5-year plan, like the last one, will encourage consumption. This will be a slow process, but I think it is happening now.
Okay.
And the 5-year plan will head in that direction.
So we are talking about incentives, Janusz. So it does seem like we can expect this continuation of that focus on improving public services and social security that was so very much part of the 14th 5-year plan. Zoning in on education, healthcare, and elderly care are all things that point to much more inclusive development, doesn't it?
From my point of view, the very important is that in this plan is mentioned the question of rural areas, the revitalization of rural areas, the ambitious plan to reduce the differences between condition of life in the urban areas and rural areas. This is very important. We have also the same problem in the European Union. We can observe the problem of depopulation of the rural areas, migration, internal migration, people from rural areas to the cities, and this is a huge challenge, and also in China. And this is very important that this plan is proposing some solutions to the future to prevent this situation, to pay more attention for the development of the rural areas in China.
So we've talked about domestic demand and consumption, but Palitha, to what extent do you think external risks and challenges, like trade tensions, affect the direction of travel for the growth of the Chinese economy?
All these restrictions that are now being imposed on Chinese exports, Chinese people traveling to other countries, etc., will have consequences which we really cannot anticipate at this time, because we were moving towards a more globalized world where movement was easier, where trade was freer, etc. And of course, you have to remember that it was the West that promoted liberalized trade or even free trade. I think the word free trade has always been a misnomer. It's more liberalized trade that the West had promoted for a long time now. But all of a sudden, the doors are shutting, the shutters are going up, and this whole concept of liberalized trade is being challenged. China, amongst the developed countries, is alone, I think, in promoting more liberalized trade. China has repeated this mantra over and over again, that it wants more liberalized trade. China benefited immensely by joining the World Trade Organization in 1999, and so did other countries. Liberalized trade was a boon to upward mobile developing countries. And then, of course, with all these restrictions coming in and bilateral deals being done, I think the entire structure of the infrastructure of liberalized trade is suffering. So China will have a problem. But then again, as I mentioned earlier, China is being encouraged, the Chinese people are being encouraged by their government to become more consumer-oriented. So their consumption levels will go up eventually, and that is a good thing for the world. And similarly, I mean, you can't improve your consumption and then expect the world to have their doors shut for your exports. It has to be a two-way street.
Yeah.
It will be good for the world if the current tensions are reduced to some extent or other. Completely, I hope, but I know it's not going to happen. We need a world where countries cooperate with each other, understand each other's problems, and then deal with them, rather than unilaterally step into the arena and say, from now onwards, we don't need to deal with you.
Janusz Wojciechowski, Palitha, Kohona, thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. It was a pleasure being with you.
Still to come here on the agenda, exactly where does AI and new tech fit into China's future? Welcome back to the agenda. And let's continue with our discussion of the outcome of the latest plenum in Beijing and its recommendations for China's 15th five-year plan. Joining me now are Chang Jun, Professor of Finance and Executive Dean of the International School of Finance at Fudan University. Heiwai Tang, Victor and William Fung Professor in Economics at the University of Hong Kong, and Margit, Head of the China Desk at the Economics Department at the OECD. It's great to have all of you on the agenda. Jun, let me start with you, because one of the key messages from the plenum was to reinforce the foundations of the real economy. What do you take that to mean, and how do you see it happening?
Sure. Good to be with you. So I think there are two directions for future development to solidify the economic foundation. One is to develop new industries. More specifically, these are industries based on adoptions of frontier technologies. For example, nuclear fusion, quantum computing, bioengineering, and so forth. So there's a press conference given the day after the plenum in which the person in charge of the Heiwai, the planning office, gave the answer that each of these new industries will be big enough so that China will create a brand new modern industry based on high tech. So that's number one. And number two is to solidify have the to develop the domestic market in order to boost consumption. So these are the two major directions that will realize the goal of strengthening the economic foundation.
Heiwai, how do you see the fundamentals of the Chinese economy changing over the next 5 years?
I think Professor Qian has it right on. There are basically two broad directions. One direction continues to be trying to build China as technologically independent as possible, given the very volatile geopolitical environment. As we know, we are only around 10 years away from 2035, which is a year set by the Communist Party to develop China to be a modernized socialist state, to have sort of like a mid-level developed countries income level. So growth continues to be extremely important. But on the other hand, we know the export market has been subject to a lot of tariffs. So the leaders in the Chinese government realize that there's need to boost domestic consumption. Yeah. So if you look at the 6 principles coming out from the plenum, the second one is actually trying to boost livelihood and safeguard quality of life. And there's specific mentions about how to release more domestic demand so that China can be less dependent on foreign markets for all the good stuff that they have been producing in the last few years.
Well, it's interesting you say that China should be less dependent on foreign trade, but China doesn't operate in a vacuum, does it, Margit? What message do you think this basis for the next 5 years is sending to the rest of the world?
Well, I think it's very important to see the context in which this new 5-year plan is being formed. So China's potential growth is slowing because of aging. So basically reinforcing the real economy means two things for the outside world. One thing is that the productivity-led growth will be the major type of growth, unlike input-based growth as in the past. And that means that not so much relying on the financial sector or the real estate sector, but more on the real economy. And that resonates very well with the new industries that were just mentioned by Jun. And the other thing I think it means for the outside world is that this reinforcing the real economy also means a policy support to the real economy. So, which is good news because amid this aging society and slowing growth, basically falling potential growth, it's very important to push out the growth potential, and that can only be done by structural reforms. So reinforcing the real economy, to me, also means that there will be structural reforms that will give more room for market forces to play. So in the end, for the whole world, this would send a message that China is remaining there to be a major engine of growth. So far, it has been contributing between 28-32%, depending on the year. And it's very important to assure the world that this will continue, at least for the coming years.
Jun, the communique also talks about a new pattern of development. What are your thoughts on that? How are things going to change?
I think there are at least two dimensions you can think about the new patterns. One is green transition, building a greener economy.
Yeah.
And so as I mentioned before, on the one hand, China is going to develop these new industries based on high tech, but the traditional industries and the new industries will all become greener. We know that China has this ambitious goals of carbon neutral by 2060. So I think green transition is one important area, one important pattern for the new development.
Yeah.
I think the second new pattern is China will continue to be pushing for open global trade and economy. In particular, as China develops these new industries, we are witnessing that Chinese firms are going abroad, going to different regions. So I think what you will see in the next 5 years is that as these Chinese firms start to build up their markets overseas, they will bring these homegrown technologies with them, and hopefully cooperating with the local factories, local markets, so that people around the world, not only the Chinese people, will benefit from these technology and innovations.
Heiwai, let's talk a little bit more about that going local, because I thought that was really interesting, that talk of refining regional economic development. How do you see China balancing domestic and international demands in the next 5 years?
So in the last few years, there are a lot of great Chinese companies producing increasingly amounts of high quality but increasingly cheaper products. And in the past, I would say many of these great Chinese companies rely on sort of the traditional Western world for consumption. At least a major market, which is the US, has been subject to their government's tariffs. So therefore, many Chinese companies since 2018 have been adopting the so-called China +1 strategy, which means that they have been trying to add additional stops for the production chains in order to get the country of origin from other countries instead of China. But those countries right now, since 2025, are also subject to new US tariffs. Of course, things may change in the near future, but China +1 strategy is no longer a very effective strategy. So I think in the next few years, you are going to see a lot of Chinese companies going out, not only to discover new production facilities and invest in foreign factories, but also to discover new markets. As we know, China is a very important player in RCEP, which is composed of ASEAN 10 countries plus China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So this region is going to continue to increase in terms of their market size, especially middle-income consumer market.
So we're talking about all the different markets, but what about the sectors? Because, Margit, modernization through technological innovation is really going to be key here, isn't it? With AI looming large. Where do you see the real possibilities in new technology in China? And how is that going to affect the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, China is already a leader in many industries. You mentioned AI, so AI patents is one of the areas where China is a leader. But I think what is important to reinforce the real economy is not just to produce more patents or other innovation outputs, but to actually use those. Because without using those innovation outputs, there won't be too much impact on productivity. So it will be very difficult to reinforce the real economy. So we have done some research on these topics using microdata a couple of years ago, where we saw that actually the commercialization rate of patents is relatively low. But it is not only about patents, and innovation goes much beyond patents or other intellectual property protected innovation. I mean, there could be a much wider innovation which would lead to a greater productivity growth. So that is one point. The other point, of course, there will be a lot of new industries emerging, maybe some which we can't even imagine now, and maybe building on the foundations. China has already been a pioneer in addition to AI, many other industries like developing new materials and maybe combining its advances in these two areas. For instance, realizing synergies by synthesizing these two areas. For instance, using AI to develop further new materials, or for instance, synthetic fibers or other materials. So basically the combination of and realizing synergies of existing innovation, maybe that's something for the future. And China has proved that it has potential to become like a world leader in many areas that are emerging, and where there is not much need for like decades of accumulated innovation or industry experiments. So these are exactly the areas. And probably that will be also in the case of new energy and green technologies, given the huge global demand. And that's where China can have an even bigger impact in the coming years, given all this large global demand for decarbonization and to reach all of their net zero goals, all countries' net zero goals. Probably China can make a big difference if there are new technologies, green technologies, and new sources of energy that are being invented in China.
Juliet, I can see you're nodding away there, and I know this is something that we've touched on already, these new horizons for mutually beneficial cooperation. What do you think, where might be top of the list for partnerships and for deepening ties?
So, as we already discussed, China certainly is developing new markets in the new regions. We call these Belt and Road initiatives, these new regions. One thing I want to add to the previous discussion about AI is that if you look at the large language model developed by the Chinese company DeepSeek, the Chinese model remains open source and can be used freely by everybody, which is different from the US models that you have to be a member and pay for it. And that's very important because it allows more people and companies around the world to use it freely. So I think what you will see is China certainly still wants to maintain its exposure, maintains its positions in the markets they're already being at, Europe, Southeast Asia. The new frontiers, including Latin America. A good example is BYD just built a big factory there in Brazil, and also Africa and the Middle East region. So we will see more development of these Chinese companies going abroad. And I think what I've mentioned is that this time the difference is that we expect to see the Chinese companies bringing the technologies, the patents, and use them in cooperation with the local markets. And again, as I said, in a mutually win-win situation in the next 5 years.
Chandran, Heiwai, Tang, Margit, Molnar, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up on a future agenda, have we missed the chance to save the planet? We'll consider what needs to be done as the world gathers for COP30 in Brazil. But for now, from me, Juliet, Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.